We got any questions? All right, I'll just grab my stuff out of here and we'll move along here. I was looking, by the way, for just looking through this other book for a moment, and I came upon a passage that I thought would interest you. That passage is about, we're talking about Mendelssohn's offspring and what happened to them. This passage was about Mendelssohn's offspring. It was so sad, this passage, that I thought I would read it to you. Because I think you get a better feeling of things if you hear something that reflects something. This is from a letter that Abraham Mendelssohn wrote to his daughter. I told you by the third generation they had all converted. And it says, Abraham Mendelssohn, 1776 to 1835, son of Moses Mendelssohn. My dear daughter, this is why I raised you as a Christian. Letter to his daughter. My dear daughter, you have taken an important step, and in sending you my best wishes for the day and for your future happiness, I have it at heart to speak seriously to you on subjects hitherto not touched. Does God exist? What is God? Is he part of ourselves? And does he continue to live after the other part has ceased to be? And where and how? And all this I do not know, and therefore I have never taught you anything about it. But I know that there exists in me and in you, in all human beings, an everlasting inclination towards all that is good, true, and right, and a conscience which warns and guides us when we go astray. I know it, I believe it, I live in this faith, and this is my religion. This I could not teach you, and nobody can learn it. But everybody has it who does not intentionally and knowingly cast it away. The example of your mother, the best and noblest of mothers, whose whole life is devotion, love, and charity, is like a bond to me that you will not cast it away. You have grown up under her guidance, ever intuitively receiving and adopting what alone gives real worth to mankind, etc., 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 etc. This is all that I can tell you. Well, I might as well finish it. Your mother has been and is, I trust, will long remain to you, to your sister, your brothers, and to all of us, a providential leading star in our path of life. When you look at her and turn her over in your thoughts, all the immeasurable good she has lavished upon you by her constant self-sacrifice and devotion as long as you live, and when that reflection makes your heart and eyes overflow with gratitude, love, and veneration, then you feel God and are godly. This is all I can tell you about religion, all I know about it. This will remain true as long as one man will exist in the creation, as it has been true since the first man was created. The outward form of religion your teacher has given you is historical and changeable, like all human ordinances. Some thousands of years ago, the Jewish form was the reigning one. Then the heathen form. Now it's the Christian. We, your mother and I, were born and brought up by our parents as Jews. And without being obliged to change the form of our religion, have been able to follow the divine instinct in us and in our conscience. We have educated you and your brothers and sisters in the Christian faith because it is the creed of most civilized people and contains nothing that can lead you away from what is good, and much that guides you to love, obedience, tolerance, and resignation, even if it offered nothing but the example of its founder, and understood by so few and followed by still fewer. By pronouncing your confession of the faith, you have fulfilled the claims of society on you, and have obtained the name of a Christian. Now be what your duty is as a human being demands of you, true, faithful, good, obedient, devoted, till death to your mother. And I may also say to your father, unremittingly attentive to the voice of your conscience, which may be suppressed but never silenced, and you will gain the highest happiness that is to be found on earth, harmony and contentness with yourself. I embrace you with fatherly tenderness and hope always to find in you a daughter worthy of your and our mother. Farewell, and remember my words. I think he also said at one point that he and his wife also embraced Christianity because, quote, it is the religious form acceptable to the majority of civilized human beings. And this letter he wrote to his daughter Fanny upon her confirmation in the Lutheran Church. So all of Mendelssohn's efforts in his own family end up in things of this kind, which is fine. But see, he's a very decent person. There's even the son is a very decent person, very gentle, sweet person. But the forces around them are overwhelming, overpowering. I don't think you can. Even with a father like Mendelssohn, they were unable to cope with these forces. And it's really quite an incredible thing. There's also, just a quick note on Heinrich Heine is a very famous German poet. He's one of the best German lyric poets, and he converted to Christianity at some point, but his much more cynical, the way he puts it. There's a little note here which I found interesting. From the nature of my thinking, he's writing to somebody, you can deduce that baptism is a matter of indifference to me, that I do not regard it as important even symbolically, and that in the circumstances in which it will be carried out, in my case, it will have little significance for others likewise. For me, perhaps its significance will be that I can better devote myself to championing the rights of my unfortunate brethren, and yet I hold it beneath my dignity and a stain on my honor to undergo conversion in order to obtain a position in Prussia. Dear old Prussia, I really do not know what course to take in this bad situation. I'll turn Catholic yet for spite and hang myself. We're living in sad times. Scoundrels become our best, and the best must turn scoundrel. I understand well the words of our psalmist, Lord, give us daily bread that we blaspheme not thy name. The baptismal certificate is the ticket of admission to European culture. My becoming a Christian is the fault of those Saxons who suddenly changed saddles at the Battle of Leipzig. Apparently there were some German troops in Napoleon's army who switched sides in a battle in 1813 and went over to the German side, so Napoleon lost that battle. So he's saying, this is why that's how deep it is for him. My becoming a Christian is the fault of those Saxons who suddenly changed saddles at Leipzig, or of Napoleon, who really did not have to go to Russia. That is, his campaign to Russia was stupid. Why did he bother going there and destroy his army? Or of his teacher of geography at Brienne, who did not tell him that Moscow winters are very cold. That's Heinrich Heine, who is, it's not all of Heinrich Heine, but he is considered probably one of Germany's greatest lyrical poets, 1797 to 1856, baptized in 1825 as a Lutheran. Later, he repented of it. He felt that it was wrong that he did that later in his life, but in any case, he did it. And many people did it here in the 19th century. He blames it on the failure of Napoleon. At least he blames his own need to do it on the failure of Napoleon. I'm not living in Germany at that time, so I can't describe it, but you see the problems that developed after people like Mendelssohn. Mendelssohn were able to hold it in check and so on, and try to make some sort of not a compromise, but try to weigh things together. You say, well, that's great that he converted to Christianity. Yes, except that he's surrendered the whole tradition from which he came from, and it's all lost. In any case, I'm sure a lot of the descendants died in the Holocaust anyway. But in any case, it's fine on a matter of a religious level, but on a personal level, it sort of is sad to see them having to do this kind of thing. We were reading last time Israel Jacobson, and you see that's where a lot of this begins. At least the next step begins in the transformation into Reformed Judaism. We did something of the dedication ceremony. We did something of the dedication address, and this is really something of the beginning of what is called Reformed Judaism. And it's a Jacobson's dates are 1768 to 1828. And the Season School was around 1801. And this, I think, temple dedication, I think, is around 1810. So it's moving very quickly in Germany, as you can see. Let me just try to give you a few of the background situations that I'm telling you that the best presentation of this is in Rudowski. So if you look at Rudowski, page 156, chapter 7, you'll find the material that will cover this quite well if you have that book. He speaks about an early predecessor of Jacobson called Friedlander, who lives longer but is born 3 years earlier. And he already starts this process of revamping Judaism. I think you can read that yourself. Jacobson, 1768 to 1828. And he gives you a pretty good discussion of Jacobson's activities. And the interesting thing then is that he moves to Berlin after that, Jacobson does. And we then get a Berlin movement towards reform. And the big situation that develops in Berlin and northern Germany is the prayer book. Now, I don't think he's behind the activities in Hamburg, but in 1817, Hamburg is involved in this kind of activity, and the 1818 a temple is dedicated in Hamburg. There you have, by 1822, you have confirmation exercises with girls. They still have, well, the problem is, again, the prayer for the return to Zion. How can you, if Germany is the fatherland, how are you going to pray for a return to Zion? So that seems to be the thing that is preoccupying them over and over again in trying to revamp these matters. So you get this Hamburg prayer book edited in 1819, and again, as I said, Rudowski covers this in pretty good detail. For instance, you're now going to get instrumental music on the Sabbath, and the organ, which is going to be introduced into the music, choir and organ, is considered a good innovation in order to make the services more attractive to the people. This is in Hamburg. What's called, a lot of the proponents of this looked upon the Judaic aspects of these things as Oriental, the sort of Oriental aspects of Judaic expression, as they would have put it, was detraction to dignity and reverence. So German was the real language that should be used in the prayer, and Yiddish, for instance, was a degraded language, which I think most of us would agree that it's a medieval vernacular language. And so, well, anyway, so there the battle is joined, and in 1820 you get Leipzig, another city in Germany, which becomes a branch of the Hamburg Temple. And these things also go on in Denmark in 1814, in Vienna in 1826, even coming to America, to Charleston in 1824, these kinds of temples and so on. But what was also developing side by side, this is really the movement towards reform, but what is really developing side by side with all this is a thing called the science of Judaism, the Science of Judaism school. And a lot of these individuals are making claims to be doing this in a scientific manner, or wishing that they could do this in a scientific manner. Now, Rudowski does a good job of explaining the influence of Hegel on these people. Hegel is really the preeminent German philosopher of the time, and his dates are coincident with all of this, what's happening, 1770 to 1831. His philosophy, of course, is what we now call the idealism school, but it basically centers around a kind of historical evolution idea, that all things are in flux and unfolding and developing. And I'm not a great expert on Hegel, and as I said, Rudowski has a pretty good description of it. But if you look at your Hegel ideas, mainly he has the whole idea of the zeitgeist. The zeitgeist, since things are in flux and unfolding. Let's see, I've got the on the board here. Spirit of the time. In case you don't know German, Geist is spirit, Zeit is time. Then it's the spirit of the time that should determine what would be the proper expression for a given moment. You know, Hegel's famous for the idea of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. And this is sort of what he presents in his thinking. Again, I'm not a great Hegelian, as historical dialectic. First you have a thesis, then there's an antithesis, and finally you have a synthesis. I think he thinks, why he calls this dialectic, I don't know. But in any case, dialectic is something that usually goes back to Socrates and what we call Socratic dialectic and Plato. How Hegel manages to bring this word that's mainly known from Platonic philosophy. Dialectic is the method Socrates supposedly used to elicit truth, to encompass this new notion of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. You really would have to read all of Hegel to find out, and I am not going to become or make you the experts on Hegel, or make you the experts on Hegel. But he is having, you know, it's the spirit of the time, and it's just like, for instance, today, I don't know who would be an influential person today. I don't know if we have any more influential people. But who's that for 20, 30 years ago? It was that linguist theorist at MIT who was Chomsky, who was really the last word in political and moral philosophy and so on. Or that, what's the fellow at Columbia University who died recently, who wrote the book on Orientalism, Edward Said, and people like that. They still advertise them in the comp lit department here and so on. These become very a la mode thinkers, you know, and they influence everybody in their time. So in a way, I guess Hegel is right on that score. But there are two individuals really that begin to appear in all of this. And I don't know if Rudowski has them front to back or back to front, but one of the first, I think the really first person is a fellow called Leopold Zunz. And then another contemporary, Nachman Krochmal. Again, Rudowski is your place for these people. That's why his book is really a unique book, because nobody really presents these important intermediate thinkers in this so-called historical school. They were friends. And Krochmal and Zunz, I think, both came from what today is Romania. Galicia is an area of northern Romania, I think. So Krochmal's dates, once again, 1785 to 1840. Nachman Krochmal, 1785 to 1840. So I think we also have Zunz writing a book sort of aping Maimonides in a way. The Guide to the Perplexed of Our Time. Maimonides, back in the Middle Ages, is famous, you probably have heard of it, for a book called The Guide to the Perplexed. So these people are upgrading this. And all of these people are part of what is known or come to be known as the science of Judaism. Let us study Judaism like a science. Let us figure out what its intrinsic elements are. Let's not go helter-skelter the way Jacobson and his colleagues are running away with things in Germany. let's see if we can apply some historical principles to the situation. Find out what the intrinsic elements are. I'm going to repeat this a little bit because most of these people are basically repeating the same idea, though they come out with different conclusions. What is intrinsic to Judaism? What can be moved ahead according to the zeitgeist? What is, you know, I guess in Mendelssohn's language, what is not a necessary element, but more of a, what's the word he used? I forget the exact word that he used, but a secondary, what was it? He had a special word. Huh?
The imperative?
No, Mendelssohn used a different word. He was using, what, you know, an element that is
Primary?
no, necessary element was primary. What he was talking about, non-primary elements. What is secondary? What is derivative, shall we say, or not a necessary. So in any case, these are the figures that emerge. For Krochmal, we need a historical approach to find out the essence of what Judaism was. And then they use the evolutionary process of Hegel to try to develop these essentials in a historical context. So all of them really had, to a certain extent, a disdain for the past, but this zeitgeist, if you want, should be the guiding motif to demonstrate what the plan and evolution of these principles should be. For instance, going again according to Krochmal, the Hebrew God should be looked upon as the embodiment of pure virtue and ethical perfection, and a universal principle that encompasses all nations. Okay, so that would be, to some extent, the kind of thinking we can get out of a Krochmal. And in Germany, parallel to these people like Krochmal and Zunz, we have an individual by the name of Geiger. Now, if you see, Rudetsky covers Krochmal on page 168. He talks about the Science of Judaism School on 170. He goes deeper into Krochmal's understanding of Judaism in 171 to 2, and then he starts moving into this Geiger individual, Abraham Geiger, 1810 to 1874. I don't see a development here. All these people seem to me to be contemporaries. So you have, if you in your essay write about this, you may be able to present a development here. I think a lot of it depends on how long these people live. Geiger lives from 1810 to 1874. The other figure that I mentioned, he gives quite a long analysis of Geiger here from page 173 to 177. And in chapter 8, for instance, he finally moves over to Leopold Zunz. But look, Leopold Zunz is 1794 to 1886. Leopold Zunz is 20 years older than Geiger. So, you know, why he treats Zunz after Geiger and not before Geiger, I don't know. To my mind, Zunz, and I have him up there, Leopold Zunz. I don't need to write the dates. You can, I just told you what the dates are. You can get the dates. Zunz really seems to me a contemporary of Krochmal. So Krochmal is 1785. He born in 17. It was Krochmal, by the way, who wrote the Guide to the Perplexed of Our Time, not Zunz. Krochmal is born in Galicia, as I said, in 1785. Zunz, you'll see, is let's see, what date did he was 1794 to 1886, 10 years after Krochmal. So I guess it should go Krochmal, Zunz, Geiger. And then another very important individual that Rudowski covers in great detail on page 192. See, no one covers these people. And this is the crux. I'll tell you why it's the crux in a moment. Zachariah Frankel. You'll find Zachariah Frankel on page 192. Zachariah Frankel, 1801 to 1875. So he really is born in Prague, which would make him German-speaking, more Central European. And a leader, as he puts it, of the Science of Judaism movement or school in Germany, even though he's from Prague. But Prague and Germany hadn't really coalesced as a separate nation. All these were Germanic areas and so on. So he really spends a long time on Frankel, because the main thing there with Frankel is what's called the historical school. So Frankel moves from the Science of Judaism school. Let me give you this Frankel here. Okay, I went wrong when I put it here. If I can give you the date here. So Frankel is involved in something that comes to be called the historical school. So this is all really intellectual thought which is occurring in Central Europe. Maybe what Heinrich Heine said is correct. If Napoleon hadn't gone to Russia, and if people like the German brigade in his army hadn't deserted over to the German principality side from the French imperial side in battles around 1813 or so, this is in Leipzig, he said, then the whole flow would have been different. Everything would have been dominated by France. But France basically collapsed after the battles that were fought from the Russian campaign in the, when's the Russian campaign? Somewhere around, I think, is it 1809 or something? Somewhere in there? 9, 10, 11, somewhere in there. And then the final defeat is when? What's the date of Napoleon's final defeat at Waterloo? He's already been exiled before Waterloo, you know. Where was he exiled before Waterloo that he came back and fought about the Waterloo from, you know? Yeah, see, your history is shaky in that area because they just don't teach these things very effectively in our area of the world. But he went to the Isle of Elba. Where's the Isle of Elba after many of these defeats that occurred after the Battle of Moscow, the Russian winter, those sorts of things, which basically destroyed his army. And then these other reversals, I guess after Leipzig and places like that, they felt they had him and they sent him into exile. Where's Elba? It's right off the Italian coast. It's just a little island 5 miles off the Italian coast, not far from, well, I guess the closest coastal town would be something like Pisa, you know, northern Italy, a little bit south of Genoa, but sort of parallel with where Florence is in Italy, but a little off the coast. Small island Elba. Well, that wasn't much of an exile. He could leave there more or less any time he wanted, and he did. Sailed back to France and tried to raise another army in 1814-15 period. And then the British came down with the German troops from England and the Germans across from Russia, Prussia, northern Germany, and where did they meet him? Waterloo. Where's Waterloo? It's in Belgium. It's outside of Brussels. So if you ever go to Belgium and you drive out of Brussels, you can see this huge memorial at Waterloo, which is this big conic-shaped hill where they, I don't know what they buried there, all the soldiers, all the equipment, everything, I don't know what's buried there, but a huge, massive mound that they erected there with monuments and everything. And it's the famous Battle of Waterloo that was fought south of Brussels. As Napoleon army came north, the English army came south, the German army came west, and they met there. And so that was the end of the French Revolution as such, as a imperialist expanding force. So as he's saying, the influence here is Central European. It's German from here on in until the 20th century, intellectually speaking, I'm talking about. It's German intellectuals, like Hegel. Who's the big user of Hegel that becomes totally famous in Western historical, political?
Karl Marx.
Yeah, Karl Marx. Karl Marx is applying Hegelian theory. God, don't ask me how. I mean, you know, this is far above my expertise level. I will tell you that. But if you're interested, you can look into it further. What does Karl Marx call it? Dialectical materialism, doesn't he? So the dialectical idea comes from Hegel, or Hegel's take on Socrates and Plato. Don't ask me how he gets it. To me, Hegel is full of wind, and so is Marx, and so are the rest of them. But they have some interesting points that they make along the windy way. Most philosophers are pretty windy, actually. So most of us are pretty windy, actually. I don't want to reserve this for philosophers, but people like to grab on to concepts, you know. In any event, dialectical materialism is a direct offshoot I don't have Karl Marx's date in front of me. I can't even spell his name. I don't have his date in front of me. But you can see that he is someone, I think, in the mid-1840s, 50s, who's maturing at that point, sees the reaction in the 1848 uprisings, the repression of the 1848 uprisings in Europe, and then starts his Communist Manifesto, workers of the world unite, you have nothing to lose but your chains, and turns it into a social revolutionary struggle. He, along with Engels in England, who picks up Marx as a boost, as a booster of Marx. Engels is an industrialist in northern England, has enough money to finance Marx and bring Marx ultimately over to England, where he supports him for the next 30 or 40 years or so, while he writes these huge tomes, which then begin to dominate political philosophy for the next 100 years or so, or at least 50 or 60 years. And make their impression all around the world, from communist China to Russia to socialism in England and so on and so forth. Not just Karl Marx, but he's one of the most well-known proponents of this. But then with Karl Marx, there's another one baptized, Jewish person baptized into Christianity. Now Karl Marx himself really is anti-Semitic. He becomes terribly anti-Semitic. And he even writes a book, a small pamphlet called World Without Jews. Because for him, Jew means financier. That's what Jew means for him. He doesn't really mean Jewish people as such, but anyone who's into finance, banking, monetary activities, that's a Jew for him. And that unfortunately, that thinking has permeated socialism, national socialism of the Hitlerian variety, national socialism of the Ba'athist variety in the Arab world. I mean, the Ba'athist Party is just a national socialist party. That's what it was in Syria and Iraq. And people like Saddam Hussein and the Syrians and others pick it up as a kind of Arab national socialism. So that's why they find Hitler and all those kind of people so attractive. But the point is that Marx's anti-Semitism moves on into these more virulent strains. I don't know if these people are really Marxists or what they are, nationalist Marxists. It's hard to say what they are. But this is the dominant philosophy that evolves in the late 19th century into the early 20th century. And so Hegel is really a wellspring of this kind of thing. And he's probably more harmless, you know, innocuous wellspring. But his ideas are then picked up and applied by these other individuals who are inheritors of his ideas and are applied as we've seen. But again, it's another person whose father baptized him into Christianity. I mean, these people are just all over Europe at this point. So the Mendelssohn program has basically failed, you could say, falling apart, at least in Western Europe. You say, well, where do the masses of Jews come from? And all these people are being baptized into Christianity. Well, to a certain extent, it comes from Eastern Europe. Eastern Europe is not a home of these ideas, though Eastern Europe becomes the home of Marxism in Russia. But Eastern Europe among the Jews is a very sort of not backward place, but extremely orthodox, not very enlightened, if you want, in terms of Enlightenment thinking and so on. Ultimately, the Enlightenment in Judaism is known as, I hate these things. I'd like to talk again. I hope we go back. I hope the boards decay and they go back to the old blackboards. It's having to, you know, work with these stupid pens all the time is really a bothersome kind of activity. All you got from chalk was dust on you. These things you can you mark up everything. Anyway, Haskalah is the Hebrew word for the Enlightenment. We're going to get the Haskalah. All these thinkers are going to be grouped together in 20th century Jewish thought as Haskalah thinkers. The Jewish Haskalah, the Jewish Enlightenment. I don't know if any of you speak Yiddish or ever hear much Yiddish. I mean, this is Hebrew actually. But if you've ever heard of Yiddish, ever heard the word seichel? He's got seichel. Anyone ever heard that word? Means intelligence, common sense, insight. It is a Hebrew word. Haskalah is just a verbal noun where two H's are added on either end of the word to give you a verbal noun, meaning to exercise seichel, or to be enlightened, or to have enlightenment, or to get into the process of enlightenment. Anyway, the reason I signed Rudowsky, the reason I went to such lengths to find the book is because, you see, it isn't that he's such a great writer or anything. These subjects are actually treated, you know, in a comprehensible manner, and there is no other book that really treats them like this. So what we say when we get to Frankel, who Rudowsky is very, very big on and obviously likes the most, we get into what is called the historical school. So what is the science of Judaism school? What is the historical school? The historical school is a descendant of the science of Judaism school. What happens is that as people try to develop this idea of studying, science means to study, studying the religion and trying to see what is a intrinsic and what is expendable aspect of the religion, and therefore how we can change, if we can change a prayer book. What do the Orthodox say about changing the thing? Well, they don't change anything. It's just what it was traditionally for 1,000 years. And as far as they're concerned, it's not ever going to change. You know, it just goes on the way it's been practiced. You don't change a prayer book in the Orthodox way of Judaism. Changing prayer books is only an endeavor of what kind of people? Reform Judaism and conservative Judaism. So, you see, first you get Reform Judaism. Reform Judaism grows out of Mendelssohn's attempts to achieve emancipation and the inability of those following him to hold these things together in the delicate balance that he was able to keep them in his lifetime and in his person. And we see what happens to his descendants. They just give up. They say, we want to be part of Europe, we're just going to convert. The only passport to be part of Europe is to convert. That's that. We're just going to do it. Now, that's what they did. So all these people like Felix Mendelssohn, all these sort of people who are writing resurrection symphonies and things of that kind, in the third generation, the second after Mendelssohn that is, are really dedicated Christians. So a lot of the criticism of the Orthodox and the reaction to the Enlightenment or the emancipation and the thinking it entailed, the science of Judaism in Germany, was criticism that all you did was basically desert and decamp. But where are all these people? Where is this reservoir coming from that still remains Jewish? Well, there are still Orthodox Jews in Western Europe, but some of the avant-garde, the tip, is converting. We're going to read another one here in the Zionist material called, I forget what his first name is, Hess, H-E-S-S. And I think he's going to write a book, we'll see Rome and Jerusalem. And he's another one that converted and then regretted it and came back. It's another contemporary and quasi-disciple of Marx who actually came back and then becomes one of the first intellectual Zionist thinkers. And we're going to study him after the exam that we're going to have, because we're going to change gears after that. But let's carry this process forward. This reservoir is coming from Eastern Europe. It's the immigration westwards of these people into Central Europe, and they don't go as far as France very much, some. And to America, the Eastern European emigration to America started really in the 1890s or so, after certain czarist reforms made it possible for them to leave the country, certain liberalization of the czarist regime. Before that, they weren't going that far. So who was coming to America in the 1840s and 50s? How come you get a Charleston reform a temple? How come everywhere in America you have temples? Because it was the German Jews that were coming to America after the first Sephardi wave. The first Sephardi wave takes place when? Do you know? The first Sephardi wave, and you know what Sephardis are from countries like Holland. Why are Sephardis from Holland? We covered it, but just to review it a minute in your mind, how come you have Sephardis from Holland? Because go ahead.
They go from Spain.
They went to Spain to Holland as refugees. Moranos, some of them just never converted to Christianity at all, not secret Jews as Moranos were, but just people who fled. Holland was more liberal. It was a Protestant Catholic situation going on in Holland. Holland was on the intellectual avant-garde in the 1600s. So those people, members of Columbus's crew, by the way, some people question whether Columbus himself was a Morano or Jewish. And he's a very strange name. Colon is a very widely used Sephardi Jewish name. Now, I think there's a lot of proof to show that he wasn't Jewish, but he was, I forget what the proof that came out, that he was a Basque or something. I can't remember how he got to Genoa and how he became that, but it's known that many members of his crew were Jewish. His doctor was Jewish. Jewish finances went into the voyage of Columbus to America. I'm not able to work on that. Good topic for a research paper if you're interested in that kind of thing. So just close enough to our subject that you can get away with it if you want to do something like that. But there's a lot of new material on Columbus and the factors behind his voyages. But it is true that Jews were looking for a place of refuge, knowing that they were about to be expelled from Spain. And a lot of the colonies in New Spain were the recipients of Spanish Jewish immigration in Brazil, and then Holland and New York, and so on. I think one of the first Jewish settlements was in Newport, Rhode Island, because the founder of Rhode Island was a terribly liberal person. I forget what his name was, but he's known as a very, welcomed all creeds in Rhode Island. He had broken away from the Puritans in Massachusetts, as you may have remembered from your high school history classes. So Newport, Rhode Island was where the first Jewish synagogue, it wouldn't be a temple, you see, because Sephardi Jews didn't found temples. Sephardi Jews would still be involved in synagogues. It was Reformed Jews from Germany that founded temples. So wherever you see a temple, you know you're dealing with Reformed Judaism from Germany. For instance, I was brought up in a place in the East Coast where my mother was from German Jewish background. My father was from Russian Jewish background. And, my father was originally very Orthodox. He had brought up in what's called a heder, one-room sort of Hebrew schoolhouse, and so on, where they just learned Hebrew and things like that, or Yiddish, or whatever they were teaching in that particular context. And my mother was like totally liberated, totally assimilated, totally Americanized by this point. And none of them were Europeanized because they were second generation. But, but the German Jews were just far more assimilated, Americanized than the Russian Jews. And for my father to marry my mother, that was a huge, I hate to put it in those terms, but catch for him, that he would get a upper middle class Jewish princess, if you want to call her. I can't picture my mother as a princess, but in any case, someone on the, that was really above his social station, and he would be basically considered immigrant, new immigrant sort of person, trying to be American and so on. So to win that, to make that conquest. In fact, I think it happened after the stock market crash, so I think there's a lot of economics that went into it. He had a job where other people didn't, but where her father lost all his money, etc. But I don't want to go into family history about how marriages developed and occurred. But it may not have been all his undoing, but obviously she did. She felt he was someone special and so on. But she's still alive, by the way. She's going to have her 100th birthday in February, so it's just quite amazing to me. I could never imagine she could survive that long. It's just astonishing to me. If you saw her when she was younger, smoking and every other thing, you would never have given her 100 years. That's all I can tell you. It's just amazing. But a lot of that has to do with willpower, just willpower. Here's a woman that just doesn't want to end. Period, and has no intention of ending as far as she has anything to say about it. It's just built into her zeitgeist, if you want to call it, her spirit or whatever. In any event, I guess women don't have some of the ailments that men have and vice versa, but she didn't have heart conditions and things like that. So once she got through a little bout of cancer, she was in good shape. But she's a dynamite still. I mean, no one can deal with her. But in any event, she's in New York, thank God. In her own apartment. My daughter handles things in New York. She's in New York now. But in any case, that reservoir came from Eastern Europe of people who were still dedicated to the old ways, hadn't been, influenced or swept over by German Enlightenment intellectual culture. And I think, I hate to get into modern historical situations, but I think that's why people like Hitler wanted to go east. As Hitler called it, the Dracht nach Osten, the drive to the east. Not just for Lebensraum, for the German national, whatever it is he had in his insane mind to create, and to eradicate the peoples, but also to eradicate this Jewish thing that he thought was, polluting German blood or whatever he saw it as at its source, you know, it's just eradicated, period. And unfortunately, I think he succeeded in large part. It's terrible to think that he actually did succeed, but he did succeed to some extent in that regard. And part of the blame there has to do with the Allies, who just did not stop the process from the air in a way that they could easily have done. They just did not bomb the railway lines going to the concentration camps. They knew what was happening. You can be sure they knew what was happening. For some reason, there were people who were not adverse to it happening too much. People like the British who didn't want them coming to Palestine, setting the situation there. And people like some people in the American administration who probably didn't want America to be overflowed, and so on and so forth. I think there were psychological and other reasons, that not just political or inability, that the concentration camp routes were not bombed when the Americans and the British were able to bomb all kinds of things, and it would take very little to have done that. But in any case, forget all that. The point is that he largely did succeed in that goal. I don't think any people has taken the blow that the Jewish people have taken, if you see them as people. These people here were studying out the science, and the historical people saw them as a people, but the Mendelssohn, Jacobson type people, Mendelssohn's descendants, didn't see them as a people anymore. So if you see them as a people, then to really lose almost half your population is a blow. I don't know any people who've ever suffered such a catastrophe, and get so little slack for it. Cut so little slack. I mean, look at the anti-Semitism brought in the world today. I don't mean to get back to that subject, but it is kind of frightening to see. I mean, the people who've undergone that, and then to be blamed for everything else still, it's quite astonishing. I won't keep on that subject. I'll just make the point that, let's be honest, the Arab existence of a nation is not threatened and never has been, and is hardly being threatened by Israel. It's not the Arabs that are in question of existing. It's whether the Arabs should have a 23rd or 24th or 25th state. They've already got 22 others. That's what the world never appreciates in all of these equations that they want. There's only one people threatened with non-existence in this whole equation, and it's quite clear who that people has been and still is. So again, I don't mean to make a big appeal here, but you know, put your head on right, not you guys, but people you meet. You know, point them in the right direction. They're literally living in cuckoo land on this subject. And you know, the Israelis are about the most mild occupiers you could have in an occupation situation. And actually, if the situation were reversed, I would hate to see what the consequences would be. The Israelis have just about done everything and restrained that a people could do in the circumstances that they've been presented with. In any event, leave that aside. What the Germans did do, I think, and what Hitler saw, was that this is where this wellspring of population was coming from. And so when he got these areas under his control, he proceeded to the so-called final solution. And, but let's go back to our attempts in the meantime, before we get into Zionism, of these individual leaders to deal with the situation that they were facing. So when we're talking about Krochmal and Geiger and people of that kind, for them, it's the Jewish mission or role to embark on a new cycle of history. So where Reform Judaism is concerned, borrowing some of the things from people like Krochmal, this idea of being a light to the Gentiles, a teacher of the nations, became very big in the mindset when they were revising the prayer book. And in fact, it became the rationale for Reform Judaism, according to people like Abraham Geiger. I mean, you're mostly non-Jewish in this room. I mean, I think it's terribly presumptuous of any group of people to think they're a light to the nations. I mean, that's some of the prophets mention that, I guess, to encourage the people. I don't think that's what the Jews were really trying to do in the Old Testament. They were just trying to live according to certain principles and rules, and some of the prophets maybe in their most inspired felt, oh, we're a light to the nations, or a teacher to the nations, or whatever. And that's very nice to think that, and a little presumptuous to even think that. And honestly, I think it's pretentious to have considered that they should take unto them, and I'm speaking from as a Jewish person, take unto themselves such a law. I think it's ridiculous. And I think the people who propounded that idea were, frankly, idiots and idiotic. And that became a guiding light in the 19th century. We've now seen that there's no light to the nations going on anywhere. And of course, we have the hindsight of history to see this, but I think it's really pathetic to look for justifications of that kind. So the big problem became whether you're going to throw out the baby with the bathwater. Whether what Judaism was in the process of this reform was going to be, I mean, I don't have the solutions personally. I'm not saying that I'm a genius and have the solutions. I don't. I do research, as you know, in the Second Temple period and the birth of Christianity, because I think that's the most interesting period in terms of trying to sort out some of these issues of the world that have somehow gotten confused, to put it mildly. And if we can sort out, I guess I'm in the historical school, we can sort out some of those problems, and then maybe we can start to sort out some of the other problems. But I don't have the answers, but I know that the answers these people propounded are almost ludicrous or ridiculous. And I think Jacobson is pathetic. And even though my mother wouldn't even know there was a Jacobson, so you wouldn't have to worry about that. I mean, she didn't know anything. She just knew who she was, but that's all. She just went and did things because she was told to do things, that's all. She never thought about it or considered it or went through an intellectual process. She just was what she was, Miss Princess, and that's it. And spoiled and so on and so forth, but you know, doted on, etc. But there was no intellectual process that ever took place, which is fine, and that's why she's living to 100 years old, because she doesn't have any doubts. She doesn't have any questions. She doesn't have anything. My son goes to see her and he just can't believe that he has a grandmother like that. He said, I can't imagine, you know, I mean, she has no second thoughts about anything. She has no, she doesn't question anything. She doesn't have, there's no indecision on anything. So anyway, that's German Judaism. How they got there, I don't know. I think Heine is similar to that and others. But Geiger is one of the most important proponents of these things. And I really do think that Geiger lived a long time in Germany. He was a very famous scholar. I worked on him when I was doing my master's and my doctorate, not realizing the effect that he had on the development of Reform Judaism in Germany, and that a lot of the work that he was doing intellectually was a product of his Science of Judaism school and his academic activities. Like he wrote a book that I met when I was doing my master's. What has Muhammad aus dem Juden genommen? What did Muhammad take from the Jews? Which really is a handbook of the Jewish influences on Islam. So he would do scholarly studies of that kind. I don't even know if it's been translated into English. I suppose it has. I don't remember if it has or it has not. By this time it must have been. So anyway, he is from 1810 to 1874. He's the leader of what we call the Jewish Science Movement of Frankfurt. He originally came from an Orthodox family. And by 1829, he got a degree in classic languages at Heidelberg, you know, foremost German university. Then he went to Bonn. He wrote the Muhammad essay that's referred to in your book here in 1832. And he finally got a rabbinical position in Wiesbaden. These are all German towns. And he resigned. Because he, you know, he resigned, I think, because I think it was over the issue of choral music. I'm not sure if he was for or against it, but I think he was probably for it. Anyway, he ultimately started one of these academic journals called the Journal of Jewish Theology. And I guess he was for the choral music. And then he went to another German town further in the east called Breslau. It was later in East Germany. He introduced the sermon there. He introduced the vernacular, German language and prayer, robes, so just like Jacobson had done 30 or 40 years ago in Season, I guess you'd say 40 years ago. So he wanted to actually start a rabbinic seminary, which is what finally was brought to America. I'll tell you about it in a moment. And this Zachariah Frankel, the one I just mentioned, was chosen as its head, but he finally got the post himself in 1872. In any case, he died in 1874. But you know, this is a real scholar, but he's a scholar with an edge. He's influenced by Hegel and Krugman, and his approach is evolutionary. His view is that each age had to deviate from the preceding one, and you have to venerate the present, the zeitgeist, if you like, of the present, not the past. Revelation for him was not a supernatural phenomenon, and we were now in this third period, this post-Talmudic period. We had a biblical period, a Talmudic period, and we're now in a post-Talmudic period. And this begins with Mendelssohn. And what we had to do was to free Jewish life from the precepts and regulations that were against the spirit of the age. Judaism for him, or for Orthodox Judaism rather, as he saw it, was a discipline of life, not a mere creed, laws that gave it, like Mendelssohn said, a natural character. Anyway, according to Geiger, what you needed a tradition, but you also had to develop the ideals that are expressed in the prophets. And you had to get rid of some of these, you know, primitive ideas. Even circumcision, I think, he thought could be abolished as something a little barbarous, a holdover of the sacrifice position. He was against a dog-like adherence to Jewish law. So you can see the influence of Mendelssohn here, but it's being pushed much further. So we can therefore surrender, according to him, the ethnic characteristics of the religion. So he deleted the prayer for the return design from the Breslau prayer book in 1854. And instead, he inserted a prayer for the millennium of mankind. The same, you know, the same pie in the sky, hopeful future that all people would be brothers, blah, 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 that we've already seen started at the Season school. There was some Hebrew language in the liturgy, but not obtrusive. And he loved German hymns, and he felt that history had pronounced its judgment on Hebrew. That is, it was a dead language, and it wasn't, you know, something that needed to be used anymore. Now, he didn't realize that someone was going to go about in the period after him, in the 1870s and 80s and so on, maybe even in reaction to people's comments of that kind, and revive Hebrew single-handedly. We will study the person after the exam who actually revived the Hebrew language as a modern language single-handedly. His name is, I hope I've got the spelling right, I always get this, Eliezer Ben Yehuda. That's his, I think that's the name he took. We'll look at when we look at the Zionist thing. He'll be in our Zionist book. Ben Yehuda, son of Judaism or Jews or whatever. So that's obviously not a pseudonym, but a new name that he's taking there. Anyway, I want to go over and I think Geiger, for the Reform Jews, is really an important person. So let's look at our excerpts here from the source reader, page 45. Well, beyond that, not page 45. Page 62. He knows that Geiger's an important person. He actually gives you the name of the Science of Judaism school in German. In case you don't speak German, here it is. Wissenschaft des Judentums. Wissenschaft in German is science. Wissen means to know. Schaft means, I think, the discipline of knowing or something to that effect. Wissen, ich weiß, ich wissen, I know. And I speak pretty good German, or at least I can understand it. Das Judentums, Juden, Jews, Tumsism, the Science of Judaism school. And he gives you the same people here that we already spoke about. He mentions Geiger on 63. He says, given most of the things that I just told you, one of the many Jewish scholars in Germany motivated to undertake a wide number of Jewish historical studies. Why is he undertaking historical studies? To see what? To see what is essential in Judaism and what isn't. He produced important studies in biblical philology, medieval Hebrew poetry, rabbinic literature, Jewish historiography, that is theory of history, contemporary theology, founded 2 scholarly journals, provided through a synthesis of Hegelian and philosophy and Jewish history the most important philosophical grounding for German Reform Judaism. Here, the thing he gives here is a selection from a lecture given by Geiger towards the end of his life. I'll just read you a few important excerpts from it, and then we'll go on to the second piece from Geiger. He has another piece here. Well, it's all in this part of this piece, so I can actually, it's all from this piece. He says, Geiger this is now, page 63. The introduction to the science of Judaism. I'll just carry on for another 5 minutes, okay? Sorry if you guys, go ahead. No.
It's over to speak to.
I mean, the bathroom is being used now, so you probably won't be able to get in, but I know we have separate men's rooms. Pretty soon we're going to give up these separate men's and ladies' rooms. I often walk into the ladies' room by mistake because I always forget where I am. I've done it several times, and I produce it shrills, and I run out like, oh my God, I'm so lost I thought I forget where I am. I don't know why they have all these things, because mostly I don't know, you know. The introduction to the science of Judaism, which is to be given here, aims at bringing about a full understanding of religious thought and ideal content which pervades Judaism and dwells within its unique, life-giving force. Yeah, okay. The only method by which such understanding can be acquired is the study of the manner in which the idea first entered the physical world, the way in which it was found expression in language, literature, in which it was manifested, and in practice in the course of history. See, all this, you see, I forgot to mention, and I should have said when I said that the historical school is a descendant of the Science of Judaism school, that the historical school is what becomes conservative Judaism. And when we get these seminaries being founded in Germany and other places in Central Europe, they come to America, and we get therefore what's it called in New York? I forget what it'll come to. Anyway, the conservative movement is based in New York City, and it has an outgrowth here in Los Angeles. It's the something. I can't remember the number, but something theological, something union or whatever. It's in New York. It will come to be momentarily. And I think out here it's called the University of Judaism. It's the organ of conservative Judaism in America, and it descends from this Zechariah Frankel's reaction to Geiger. Not just Zechariah Frankel, but Leopold Zunz and these others who don't go as far as Geiger. And Reform Judaism, the seminary, where's the big the Jewish Theological, that's what it's called, the Jewish Theological Seminary is the one I was thinking of in New York City. The one in Cincinnati is called, I think, Union Theological, no, that's the, there's another one in Cincinnati that has a different name, it's the Reform Judaism Center. And that also has an extension out here in Los Angeles. But in any case, they start to export these seminaries where they're going to teach rabbis and give them their certifications. None of these is recognized in Israel. Israel today is totally under the domination still of Orthodox Judaism. And the Russians and other immigrants come and want to change that situation. These religious parties in Israel, which have become political parties, fight this tooth and nail. Which is why, for instance, there's no secular marriage in Israel yet. Which is why you have to convert Orthodox style to be recognized as a Jew in Israel. My wife was a convert. She went through a conservative conversion and then she did an Orthodox conversion. Because we would never have been able to get married in Israel without an Orthodox conversion. Though one was no more stringent than the other. But, you know, they will not recognize anything because the rabbis in Israel have a hold over the areas of what we call personal status, as I described to you. What is the reason for this? I explained it to you. Do you remember? The Ottoman system that preceded it. These are all what we call Ottoman successor states. Israel is an Ottoman successor state. You say, how come? Well, that's where the previous authorities were Ottoman. Palestine, the British only came in as a mandatory power. They only stayed 30 years. Syria is an Ottoman successor state. Lebanon is an Ottoman successor state. Jordan is an Ottoman successor state. Iraq is an Ottoman successor state, not Egypt. Egypt broke away from the Ottoman Empire much earlier, after Napoleon's time, when they had a takeover there of the Mamluks and others. That's another story. But these states that we're dealing with in America is involved in an attempt to sort out. Lucky, you know, good luck to America to sort out a total mess from the beginning. That's not to say they shouldn't try, because if they don't try, they're liable to have worse things happen here. But in any case, trying to sort this mess out there that was left after the Ottoman Empire. All this comes from the collapse of the Ottoman Empire at the end of World War I. None of these states existed before the end of World War I. All of these states grow up in the aftermath of World War I, which is a period of history that I know many people are weak in out here in California. They don't teach it. And so I can't help it. So what should you do? Well, just keep on looking yourself into it. I'll do a little bit more, then we'll take a break. Only when the spiritual motive behind Judaism has thus been traced inductively through reason, would it be possible to gain a true conception of its full content and philosophical, religio-ethical tenets. The science of Judaism may thus be divided into three aspects. Philological, meaning language aspects. Historical, meaning also Jewish literature and culture. And philosophical and religion. Oh, very high sounding, isn't it? Very intellectual. I'm not impressed. To begin with, there will be some who will count against Judaism the fact that it has a philological aspect, Hebrew he's talking about, which is supposed to be no less important than its history. They will point out that where Christianity exerted some influence on the development, or rather style of the language, it did not make its appearance in a language of its own, but in Greek, the idiom of the culture, the zeitgeist of that time. And then Christianity employed Latin, so Christianity was not tied to a language, as he would say Judaism and Islam is and was. And so he finally says, on a closer examination, everyone will find that what seemed an advantage for Christianity is actually a shortcoming, and that what first appeared to be a weakness of Judaism is actually a strong point. A new idea can originate only in a strong personality. It's only by a strong individual that a universally acceptable idea can be conceived. Ha! Well, you know, this guy's just throwing out ideas. None of this is proved. It's impressive, but it's not proven. And I would hesitate to throw out such ideas myself and so with such certitude, but that's the sign of German Jewry. This is what they were like. It explains my mother to me too. She never doubts anything, and this is the way they are. And you see, Geiger is a very good representative of this, and he's obviously been studying Islam too much and Muhammad. Because certainly Muhammad is a very strong personality, as far as he's concerned, I'm sure, leaves his mark on Islam. Let's stop there, have our break. We'll come back at 20 of, or 20, yeah, 20 of, 25 of, 20 of, 25 of. And we'll continue on, and then we'll talk about the exam at the end of the period, okay? I'll have to pass around a roll sheet after that, but we will get through this stuff, and we will be finished with it, I assure you, at the end of the next, this period. God willing. We all die in the process. Nothing can be more boring to me than this stuff, but it's very important.